Hello, Mr. Skoback. Hello, because science teacher. I'm sorry we are running a little late today. I saw that no stream had gone out, so I thought I would jump on super fast. How's everyone doing? Hopefully this sounds okay. If I can get a sound test from either Skoback or because science teacher, I'd appreciate it. All right, cool. All right, everybody, thanks very much. Let me go ahead and do our quick little ad here for 2 seconds. We'll be right back.
Are you looking to become a Tier 1 operator in the gaming world? Elevate your games with Black Site Studio Terrain. Oh man, hold on a second. Okay, cool. It's working after all. All right, everybody. Again, apologies for the late notice and for the late of, for being late. We are trying to scramble and catch up here a little bit. Hopefully that sound isn't too bad. I'm going to go ahead and shut down this fan. Hopefully that will reduce the hiss there a little bit. All right, welcome everyone to the stream again. Excuse me, Skoback, hello. Because science teacher, hello. Banana Pants 6, hello, and welcome very much to our super fast Sitrep hobby stream. All right, so again, I apologize in advance because everyone knows my webcam is like, three dirty donkey asses strung together in a line. Hold on just a second here. Let me go ahead and get over to it. However, I do have a new setup here, so hopefully it will work out a little bit better. All right, so hopefully we are looking now at a slightly better hobby setup than we had last time on my desk. Okay. So, again, hello everyone. This is just going to be a quick, fast stream. Again, I'm just here to kind of fill up a spot in the schedule, so to speak. Let me put on my gigantic glasses so I can kind of see what I'm doing here. Move some of this stuff out of the way. Alright guys, let's see. So like I've been saying, we really didn't hear the fan. I heard what I thought was a compressor going. Yeah, see, Jen is so used to hearing the fan here in the house that she barely hears it anymore. No, that was an oscillating fan that was set up here to kind of. We do live in Florida. It's really, it never really gets cold down here, so sometimes we have a lot of fans going to kind of keep things under some measure of control, temperature-wise. But anyway, okay. So as people may have seen on, as people may have seen over on Beasts of War / on tabletop / whatever. I have been trying to salvage my Marine Corps project here. So this is the Ryan's Leatherneck series, the Ryan's Leatherneck box from Battlefront over on, by Battlefront for Team Yankee. Okay, so obviously these are not done in Team Yankee colors. This is, we're not going to fight in Germany here. What we're doing instead is I'm trying to build these and use these as somewhat proxies, or at least a starting point, for a 1991 Desert Storm force for the U.S. Marine Corps. So I used the Ryan's Leatherneck box from Battlefront for Team Yankee. I got it out right that time. And again, we were looking at this a little bit earlier in the stream. I'm happy to say some progress has been made on this since we talked about it last. Although not as much progress as I would like, and I'll explain why. So I had everything, when we last saw this, I had these all I had these all primed, and then I had them base colored, and then I had some additional, like on the other underside of these LAVs, you can see it here, there's a little bit of brown that I had airbrushed on there as well. I have a Badger Renegade airbrush is my airbrush of choice. A lot of people have an airbrush kind of like this. Great little airbrush, cost me about $100, or maybe even a little less than $100 for the compressor. So definitely cost effective. And what I've been doing since then is trying to take the next steps in as far as building these building these miniatures. It's been a mixed bag. It's been a mixed experience. It always is with desert vehicles. What we're aiming at eventually for these M60s is something like this. Okay, this is obviously a much larger. This is 1:32 scale from Forces of Valor. M60 A1 U.S. Marine Corps with the ERA reactive armor panels that we see widely used by the Corps in 1991 Desert Storm. So very quickly, obviously the scale is very different. What we can see is that these Team Yankee M60s don't have the same ERA panels. In fact, these ERA panels were a little busted up. I had to fabricate this piece and these two pieces here. These are completely homemade by some mat board, some kneaded eraser, and some little bits stolen from my girlfriend's jewelry box. Shh, don't tell her that I just said that on the air. And then a lot of brush up, a lot of painting, a lot of fixes. Also, the suspension was broken when I got this, so yeah, this thing needed a little bit of love. But this thing is up to what it's supposed to look like for a January-February 1991 force for the U.S. Marine Corps in the Gulf War I, in Operation Desert Storm. Notice there's no Abrams here. There's no M113s, there's no Abrams. This is the Marine Corps, not the Army, and they use different equipment. The Marine Corps has always been, unfortunately, a little behind sometimes the Army as far as when they get the best new land equipment. The Marine Corps didn't get M1s until a lot later in the 1990s. They would eventually have them for Operation Iraqi Freedom, the second Gulf War in 2003. But in 1991, they were still rocking around with these old things, and they made the best of them. So that's what I've got here. Obviously, I don't have the ERA panels. They didn't come with those because the Ryan's Leatherneck kit does not include those. So I'm going to have to make those a little bit later. What happened after the last hobby stream I had since last Thursday was I tried to put a wash on all these American Marine Corps vehicles. Again, Ryan's Leatherneck and the LAV-25 kit. That's a separate kit. They give you 5 LAV-25s. That's them here. These things all kind of come in two different kits. So you don't get all of this. I don't want to misrepresent here. You don't get all of this with Ryan's Leathernecks. You get this with Ryan's Leathernecks, and then you get this with a separate kit I bought that I bought as well. Also from Battlefront, just a different kit. I also have my 20, which I'm now unable to find. That's great. I'll have to find them in a later time. I'll get off camera a little bit later. I'll see if I can find them. The Ryan's Leatherneck kit also comes with some U.S. Marine Corps infantry. And I don't want this to turn into a product review, but as far as whether or not those kits are good or not, by and large, yes. I mean, for the money, it's not too bad. Not perfect, but by no means bad by any stretch of the imagination. I've had a lot worse. Oh, cool! Thank you very much. My producer and sound designer, Glades Runner, has provided me with a rifle platoon. Actually, you know what? I take that back. You don't get the rifle platoon with the
Ryan's Leatherneck box. The Ryan's Leatherneck box comes with only the M60s and the Humvees. The, these Hummers, or some people call them the old 1990s Humvees, and they give you three different versions of those. Then I had to buy the rifle platoon separately, and I'll show you what those look like, although they're nowhere near finished. And then I had to get the LAVs separately. So this is a combination of three kits. So I tried to put a wash on these things starting on Friday, and man, guys, the wash went down like really bad. It was almost heartbreaking to watch these miniatures more or less ruined right before my eyes. It's happened before and happened again. I was not very happy with it. I tried to repair it with some spot fixes, but I was having a very difficult time coming up with a brush equivalent to the color that had originally gone down there via the airbrush. I couldn't just airbrush the vehicles again because I was then out of my Vallejo sand colors. So Vallejo washes do work. Again, not saying anything bad about them. I guess I'm just not very good at using them yet. And anything with a desert or an Arctic kind of a modern military color scheme, anything that's lightly, oops, I'm shaking the table here, anything that's lightly schemed is really, really what's the word I'm talking about here? Is very, very unforgiving. It's really terrible to do a wash on. You have to be murderously careful. So, what did I do to fix these? Well, grabbed some of my old reliables. Don't laugh at me too hard. Went down to the craft store, or actually I had this stuff hanging around, and had to mix my own paint. So these three colors got mixed up in a little bit of a bowl here. Hopefully that's not coming out too horribly. I'm looking at the glare here over here on the screen. Okay, that's not too bad. These three colors got mixed together. This is about 90%, 20%, sorry. Yeah, 90%, sorry, wrong color. 90%, 20%, 10%. Got mixed up in a little, mixing tray or whatever. Thinned out with about 20% more water because you don't want to shoot just regular acrylic through an airbrush. That will not work. And again, it's not the ideal solution, but these Badgers are very good, very tough little airbrushes. I have a Badger Renegade. Tough, resilient, pretty forgiving airbrush as long as you take care of it between uses. So I was in the military like literally 100 years ago. So one of the things they teach you is to really take care of your weapon. So you don't do anything. When you come back from the rifle range, you might be on the rifle range for an hour. You spend 3 hours cleaning your weapon before you turn it back into the armory. You take that same kind of care of your paintbrush or your airbrush, and it's going to treat you well, even when you abuse it, like I abused it earlier. Again, I do not recommend or endorse, or whatever you want to call it, shooting paints like this through an airbrush. That's not what it's made for. But I was in a bit of a tight spot, got away with it, and was able to put down a new coat of airbrush over top of my screwed up wash on these vehicles. Then I spent the next 2 days, it took literally 2 days, a day and a half, let me be honest. It took about an hour per vehicle, and I have 14 vehicles here. To pin wash these things, again, you probably can't see it with the amount of detail that's coming out here on these vehicles. But to pin wash these vehicles, to get them to where I kind of wanted them, where I wanted to get them. I also had already done all the tracks and all the wheels, and again, it has like that brown muddy kind of a color underneath there for a different color. So I didn't want to lose that when I re-airbrushed these. So there was a lot of cardstock put over this. It was a nightmare, folks. I spent like the last couple days trying to save these vehicles. But fortunately, I was able to do that. Then I finally started going forward with some basic dark gray. Again, dark gray, not black. Some very basic pewter gray on all the weapons. I'll go over the weapons again in a little bit, like what weapons are actually on these vehicles. And then with a nice heavy wash of, again, Vallejo black. The usual. I do like Vallejo washes. You just have to thin them out, and apparently I have to get better at using them. And again, especially with any kind of desert or Arctic vehicles, you've got to be very careful. Don't do the usual where you just take a brush and you just wash the whole tank and wait for it to dry. That will not work on these light-skinned vehicles, especially modern lighter colored vehicles that have these very broad panels on them. Okay, that stuff works great on World War II tanks that are usually a dark green. Like I've got a little bit of a like a Churchill here. Oops, there goes the turret. Must have been hit by a tiger. All right, so yeah, little vehicles like this. It's probably not coming out terribly well on the camera. Same scale, 15 millimeter. So you can see how big those Churchills were, even compared to a modern tank. Tanks like that are in a darker color, yeah, dunk the wash on them. Shake them off once or twice, let them dry, and they'll be fine. They're going to look great. In fact, you're going to want to wash them pretty heavily. Still thinning out a little bit because Vallejo washes I found are actually just pretty damn thick. Probably by design. It's good news for you as a hobbyist, I feel, because that way you just, put a little bit of reducer in there, a little bit of thinner. Not reducer, I should say thinner. A little bit of thinner or even just a little bit of water. And you can really get your money's worth out of it. I've been using this bottle of Vallejo wash for the better part of 2 years, and it's still only I still have at least a third in there, maybe almost a half, 40% maybe. And I use black wash for practically everything. Even when I'm, like this is a sepia wash here, I still cut it with some black to make it, a little bit darker. So I was finally able to put a decent wash on them. Then I went back and I did the vehicles. Again, light gray, or actually that's not even light gray, that's like a pewter gray. Like a pewter gray. Put the dark wash on top of the weapons. First a general wash, let that dry, come back with a pin wash on oh god, I can't remember where I put all my brushes now. I pretty much had to tear my desk apart to set up this little station. I do have my 5/0 brush. This thing has about 6 hairs on it. But when you're doing individual pin washes on a 15 millimeter, let me try and get that closer to the camera here. On a 15 millimeter M240 on the roof of this LAV-25, and you're trying to get the gap that's between the barrel and the gas tube underneath, and then also the receiver and the muzzle brake and so on, or the flash suppressor, whatever you want to call it, it is kind of tough. But that's when you go back in there with your very, very small brush and you start doing a pin wash on these vehicles. So these, so again, the box for the LAV-25 platoon gives you 5 LAV hulls, more or less, and then you get to pick what you put on there. I put on 3 of the usual LAV-25s with the regular 25 millimeter automatic cannon, 1 with a commander, just so he can be like the unit commander, and then 2 with closed hatches. They have the usual M240 up on the top, and again the 25 millimeter automatic cannon on the back. I did made up one as a mortar carrier, so it has a different engine deck on the top that they give you in the kit, and they give you plenty of choices in the kit. Engine deck on the kit, a different engine deck, so to speak. You notice that the hatch is in a different place. There's no turret, obviously. These doors open up, and inside you put a little mortar crew with 2 guys. I've started painting them as well. The mortar is painted. And then I did my last one as an ITV, improved tow vehicle. This is the same boom mount that you see on the M901. Anyone who's familiar with Team Yankee, either the novel or the game, is going to know what an M901 is. This is basically the same kind of mount that's up on top of a that's up on an LAV-25 instead of on an M113. These vehicles are gold in defense. Okay, because unlike most tow-mounted vehicles, this thing can only, most tow-mounted vehicles like the M2 Bradley can only fire 2 tow missiles before having to reload. This thing, this boom, actually folds back into this hatch that you can see back here at the rear of the vehicle. It reloads and it pops back up. This is an APC that does not, or I should say an infantry carrier. This is a troop carrier that does not carry troops. It's been converted to completely carry nothing but anti-tank missiles. And as far as a game goes, or I should say for game purposes, it can fire pretty much all day. Again, the M60s have the usual built-in machine gun in the commander's cupola. The M68, which is the American license-built version of the British L7 105mm rifle, that's on pretty much every NATO tank.
except British tanks, ironically, through most of the Cold War. And again, they give you six Humvees. And again, for the for the Humvees, they give you a bunch of choices. I decided, just for fun, to do one with an M2. I'm sorry, an Mark 19 belt-fed automatic grenade launcher. I decided to do one again with a single tow tube. This is different from the ITV I was talking about before. This thing fires once, and then they pretty much have to take the weapon apart to load a new missile in, and it takes all day. Pretty much in game terms, this thing should get like one or two tow missile shots, and then that's it, depending on how your game works. An ITV, on the other hand, improved tow vehicle, can launch pretty much, for the duration of your game. And the rest of them with the old reliable Maw Deuce. The Maw Deuces really came down good. I don't know, again, the light here isn't the greatest. Um, but the wash on these Maw Deuces came out really, really, I think, really good. So what's left? Well, hopefully you can see here. On the Humvees, I've put in some windshields and some side windows. I'm going to put a little bit of a shade on them because I think they're a little bit too bright at the moment. Tail lights are in there. Tail lights are in two colors, red and then a pink, to make it look like it's actually like shining a little bit. Again, there are red lights and also white lights on the front grille of most Humvees of the period, and then yellow turn signals here at the back and here at the front. And again, the weapons are done. So this guy's pretty much done, except for the actual crewman. This guy's gonna. I have him base coated. I gotta do his flesh tone. I gotta do his camouflage. I gotta do some things. But these Humvees are pretty much done now, except for again, I'm gonna put a second tone on these little glass panels for the side windows and also on the windshields. And of course, the crewman's got to be done. Other than that, these toes. I'm sorry, toes. These Humvees are pretty much done. What I might also do is I have some plastic broom bristles that I might cut off of the household broom and make little tiny antenna. There'd be a nice little short, almost clear plastic antenna. Might be a nice touch, an additional touch that most Humvees won't have. I also might reinforce the mud on the bottom here between the wash and some of the other colors that went in here. I'm starting to lose that. I might reinforce that to make that a little bit better. But I'm pretty happy with these Humvees. LAVs, pretty much the same story. They have two yellow lights, almost like turn signals, I guess, or hazard lights or tactical driving headlights. In other words, they're not bright white like a regular headlight. Regular safety headlights, yellow lights up front. And in the back, what I'm noticing on these kits, this is one of the things that is not perfect about these kits, is the small, I'm almost positive you won't be able to get a good look at this on the camera here, the very, very small cylinder that sort of hides, or it's almost like a covering, where the tail light is not symmetrical. So there's one on the left side of the vehicle, I'm sorry, on the right side of the vehicle, there's not one on the left side. I don't know why. So what I'm actually having to do is I'm taking an old gun barrel and I'm cutting my own tiny pieces that I'm going to mount. Pretty much this piece here, I also want them on that side, because for some reason this kit doesn't have them. They're supposed to be symmetrical. They're supposed to be one on both sides. That'll allow me to put tail lights on both vehicles. I know I seem like I might be a little bit crazy to my tail lights and my turn signals and my headlights. When your vehicle is, because of historical reasons, this drab, you pretty much have black and two shades of brown, maybe a little bit of dark gray for the weapons. You're kind of anxious to put any kind of color you can. So again, it's probably not coming out great on this camera, but I'm really happy with the way these headlights are actually popping. These headlights are all two colors. For the white, it's a light gray followed by a dot of white. So again, it has that slightly rounded, slightly shiny kind of a illusion to it. The yellows are orange with a little bit of yellow, and the reds are red with a little dot of pink. Hello, Mr. Rasmus. How you doing? Welcome to the stream, sir. How you doing? The windows look like sky. Yeah, these windows are way too bright. So what I tried was
A little bit of actual, sky blue. Surprise, surprise. Or I think they call it like rum. It doesn't matter. It's cheap craft store blue. So I had a little bit of blue, but what I thought was going to be the secret sauce, and then some gray to tone it down a little bit. But then what I thought was kind of going to be like my secret sauce here is some interference blue. This stuff works great for gun barrels. It puts like that little bit of a metallic shine, a little bit of metallic blue shine on your weapon, but it's more of a temperature. Well, it's interference. You guys know what that is. And it works great on like large gun barrels, like machine gun barrels and things like that. I had a great time with this on my Wild West guys I made for my dad. They worked great on those big 40 millimeter six shooters. So I kind of mixed all that together and I put it in these Humvee. Let me get that close to the camera here, and I put it in here in these Humvee. In these Humvee windows, it just came out way too light. So I'm gonna look at some. I've seen like some people who've done like helicopter canopies, and some people who've done like cockpits on battle mechs and things like that. Pretty much when it's not clear, they have some tricks to paint it to make it look like it's glass or whatever. And I'm gonna do that. Then I'm gonna take a little bit of my girlfriend's glass. Nail polish, a clear nail polish, and put a couple dabs on that. I've done that for some of my POH 105s and my Soviet Heinz for Team Yankee, my German attack helicopters, my PH 105s or my POH 105s. I would go get them, but I don't want to get up. They're not quite within arm's reach. And those came out really good, so I may try something similar here. But right now, they're just a little too bright. Skobeck, I agree 100%. Yeah, one color sucks. I really like painting British sermons. Oh, thanks, Jen. Cool, thank you, Jen. Yeah, so this is kind of what I was aiming at. These are some POH 105s that I was working on for my Team Yankee West Germans earlier. Again, the blue is just simply much darker. And then what I was able to do after that was go over it with a nice, thick, gulpy, meaty, glob it on smoothly coat of basically just go to the cosmetic store and buy some nail polish remover. Or not nail polish remover, just like some basic nail polish. Ask your wife, ask your girlfriend, steal it when she's at work, whatever. Get your hands on some of this stuff, and it comes out okay. It comes out okay. But say your hobby prayers before you start this. Disconnect the phone, unplug the internet, because you have to concentrate. There is no forgiveness here. You make a mistake, you are foobarred. You have to be very, very careful. It's not like acrylic where if you make a mistake, you can paint over it. You can kind of wipe it off very quickly with some warm water, and it was never there. With this kind of stuff, you got to really watch it. It's on for good. The only thing that really takes it off is nail polish remover, and by the time you start doing that on these soft plastics, you're almost melting the plastic. So, uh, so again, I've been kind of chewing on these guys all day. I'm down into kind of the detail work here. I haven't started making the ERA panels. I know what I want to do with them. I know how I want to make them. I just don't have access to a really, really nice printer. I guess, yes, I'm going to make them in Photoshop, and then I'm going to print them out on some nice cardstock and literally just bolt them straight to the thing, straight to the turret and also the hull of the tank. That sounds crazy, but I've done stuff like that before, where you can actually make your own model components if you're careful and if you're crafty and in the right conditions with Photoshop. I've almost built my own miniatures with Photoshop. You can do it. It's just not. You have to look for the right opportunity. Again, what we're basically going to be looking for here are these larger pieces of reactive armor plates. Again, I'm not going to be doing each individual tile like that. Will be a piece. This will be a piece. This will be a piece. The glacis will be a piece. There's still going to be like 11 or 12 pieces per tank. It's still going to be a pain in the ass. But these little studs that kind of mount them on there will be pre-drawn on there. The smears that kind of come off the bottom of these locking nuts will also be already designed in Photoshop.
We'll print it in Photoshop in several different color temperatures, several different sizes, and we'll get one that's close. We'll then mount it on some very thin cardboard. Probably like the kind of cardboard that, these boxes come in. Not like the back of a notebook thickness, but even thinner than this, or thinner like this, I should say. And believe it or not, that should work. I know it sounds crazy, but I've pulled off weirder things with Photoshop and homemade um, components, hobby components before. Probably the biggest example I've ever managed to do was I bought also from Battlefront the BMP platoon. So you get the BMP platoon from Battlefront, and they do a great job. They give you plenty of choices, basically two choices, but they give you everything that you need for both choices. That's the BMP1 and the BMP2, predictably. Okay, great. The thing is, I decided to do BMP2s, make my army a little more modern. The BMP1 has a completely different turret and a completely different engine deck. So that when they give you these choices, they give you an entirely different engine deck, like the whole top part of the APC, okay, and then a whole turret for the BMP1. So I built my, excuse me, I built my BMP1s, sorry, my BMP2s, photographed the side of the tank after it was built, painted, airbrushed, the whole 9 yards. Took a photograph of the side of it with the wheels and the tracks, and after that, yeah, just printed that. And with a lot of care and a lot of diligence, I was able to take those BMP ones and turn them into actual tabletop miniatures. That you wouldn't be able to do that with these because there's wheels and everything else. You wouldn't be able to do that with any kind of a tank. But the BMPs, the way the hull is shaped, if you have the top and you have the turret, and you're crafty enough with your Photoshop, and again, it's a 15 millimeter miniature, so it's like from 3 or 4 feet away, you can't really tell. You hold it up, you're obviously like, oh, those tracks are just two pieces of cardboard, or whatever. But I was able to basically squeeze five more miniatures out of that case. And again, if I set up a table and didn't tell you guys, or didn't tell my opponent, they'd never know until they actually knocked one of those out and picked it up off the table and to remove it off the table, and they'd be like, "What the hell, man? These aren't even miniatures underneath there." And, well, again, at small scales, you can get away with a lot. For your BMP kit, yeah. Well, again, the BMP kit, the BMP2s I built like right out of the instructions, but then they give you so much. They give you, because of the way the BMP is designed, and because of the way, the differences between the BMP1 and the BMP2, they have to give you a different engine deck, and they have to give you a completely different turret. And after that, I was able to, pretty much go from there. And again, it's kind of a Kmart job. You would notice the second you picked up one of the miniatures, but as a playing piece, it works fine. The point of the story is that I'm not worried about those panels. I only have an inkjet printer here at the house, so I either have to go to Kinko's or have to go to work or something like that to actually print out something on a really nice laser printer. I might try it on a regular inkjet and see what it looks like. But right now I'm on a week's vacation, so I'm not going in the office. I'm probably just going to go down to Kinko's and just have somebody print it, or print it myself. The point is on a nice, laser printer. It's going to be tough to see on this terrible camera of mine, but these M60s also have the periscopes painted in around the commander's cupola, also the driver's hatch, and the same with the LAVs. So, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do from here. It's probably going to be a terribly boring stream. I don't want to turn this light on because that's going to be way too bright, I'm afraid. What's that? Alright. I don't want to break out the airbrush. So what I was working on was putting in those those new mounting cylinders for the left-hand side
tail lights that these LAVs are for some reason missing. It's the only real flaw in these LAVs as far as the kit goes. That and the details are a little soft on like the hull. Like this here, I really had to pick these out with dark wash. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to see them. But the wheels are great. The undercarriage is great. It went together great. The backside is fine. The weapons are fine. It's just I wasn't terribly happy with these side panels. And the fact that I had to paint them twice because I screwed up the wash, I lost a little bit of the detail there as well. But these details were pretty soft even before that. Again, hopefully I saved it with some pin washing. Some very tedious pin washing. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead just for a few minutes. A week of vacation. Dude, trust me. Where I work, you earn your vacation. You earn it. They do not play where I work. I mean, great pay, great benefits, but also they're pretty serious as far as work. They get their money's worth out of you. But yes, right now I feel very lucky. Alrighty here. I'm making a super fast impromptu tool to mount these very, very small pieces on the back of this. This is me just being super anal retentive. This is probably the last 15mm army I'm ever going to build. And to be honest, I was in the Marine Corps during the time of this particular conflict, so I want to make sure that I really do this army right. I knew people who were actually in these vehicles. I wasn't personally. I was in supply. I was in the rear with the gear. But this particular force is kind of personal for me, so I really want to do it right. Long story short, take your shot. That's why I'm putting so much effort into this, down to, again, the stupid cylinders that these tail lights are mounted on. Hope I'm in the middle of the camera there. A toothpick puts on a tiny little dab of super glue. And then the other side of the kneaded eraser, the toothpick that's a little bit of kneaded eraser on it, helps me actually put the piece in place. Let it dry for a second. That one's mounted. Then I have to paint it. The regular brown that it's supposed to be. Ideally, I would have put these on there before I airbrush them, obviously, but I did not notice that the pieces were missing. Is that too bright? That's too bright, isn't it? Oof, yeah, that's too bright. Oh, that's definitely too bright. If I had known I was going to be streaming tonight, I probably would have saved a more, what's the word, dramatic piece of the hobby, or piece of these vehicles for the stream, but I'm putting on tiny little pieces that you guys probably are having a tough time even seeing on the stream. Alright, there's the second one in place. And there's 5 LAVs in the platoon. great deal of my miniatures are built myself to one degree or another, or at least modified. That's three. Again, the difficulty is, at least in regards to this project, um, the whole thing is to some degree a kit bash. I'm using a Team Yankee force to do something for a historical 1991 conflict. So it is not a complete perfect match. Okay, that's four. I'm actually cutting these out of an old piece of sprue that was a little too big. This is an old ditching log that came off the back of my other T55 kits. It was too big, so I had to shave it down with a regular, hobby knife until it was approximately the right circumference. In other words, where it at least sort of looked like it matched the other one. It's probably still a little too broad, but I don't think anyone's gonna seriously take me to task on my LAV-25s for the size of the cowling that goes around that tail light. If anything, the model is actually more accurate now than it was when I found it. Alright, so I'm going to let those dry for just a second before I start to paint. I have some of my 70, 20, 10 magic mix, whatever you want to call it, my hobby paint here. I don't need my super thin brush for this. But my only 15 millimeter is the Team Yankee U.S. Army. I remember fighting that army in the Yugoslavian War. I fought that army several times with mixed results. If I want an extra PAH attack helicopter, let me know. I got one of the Adepticon swag bag all by its lonesome. That's something to do me much good. I actually have never used my Bundeswehr army at all. I built it way back in the day. Literally, oh god, I don't even know. It was right before my birthday. I remember because I won a golden button for it. And it's never been played. I'm not really a big Team Yankee player. I know, as I says the guy who's now building a Team Yankee army here on Twitch, but so I appreciate it, but I honestly don't know what I would do with it. Speaking of swag bag, I still have never painted the commemorative Vietnam miniature that came with the swag bag at Historicon. The thing to remember about acrylics like this is they always dry dark. At least the cheap ones that I use. I don't know. Like the Vallejo airbrush. I only have like Vallejo washes, Vallejo airbrushes, and whatchamacallit. That's it for as far as like real hobby paint. After that, I just go to the craft store. So I may be talking up my ass here, but at least for the kind of paints I use, they always dry a lot darker than they go on. So you have to kind of aim lighter than you want the final product to be. Double true if you plan to slap a wash on it. Like right now, that probably looks really light to you guys. It looks pretty light to me. It's going to get darker, I promise. And Jen, if you could do me a favor and check us out on YouTube, because I'm only looking at Twitch here. I just want to make sure we don't miss. Last time I was painting my T54s, Chris came on, and I didn't even know he was on the stream, or he was like hanging out with us until after the stream was over. I felt kind of bad. I reached out to him on Skype afterwards. I was like, I'm sorry I didn't reply. I didn't know you were on the stream. Okay, so that's all the pylons. You notice that these have the red tail light already on them, and these ones don't, because I literally had to make them. Make them, apply them, and then paint them. And they're still not quite done, because I have to put a little bit of a wash on it. Again, it would have been 100 times better to put all that stuff on there before the spray paint started going on there, but hey. This whole army has been a bit of an exercise in doing things in the wrong order. It's been tough. Desert armies, I find, always are, because I think they're lighter skinned or lighter colored, and any mistakes are going to show a lot more clearly. Meanwhile, guys, the Iraqis that I was painting on our last stream, I finished those, or at least I finished the tracks that we were working on. I also went ahead, so these are some of my Type 59s. They were looking at before. So the tracks that we were painting on our last hobby stream, I just painted on the block colors. I went back now and I kind of picked through all the wheels, picked through the links that go into the teeth of the drive sprockets, the back sides, the undersides. You guys paint tanks, you know what it is. It's very tedious sometimes to get the tracks on there right. I also lightened the color a little bit. Because I wanted the color to be a little bit lighter on the track so I could get a wash in there and show a little bit more contrast. So again, Type 59s, Zu-23-4s, those are your anti-aircraft vehicles. I went ahead and very carefully, excuse me, cut the skirts off some of my T-55s. So again, those are super glued on there. In goes the hobby knife and a little bit of patience. Nice little glass of 100 proof Southern Comfort just to kind of steady the hand a little bit. And managed to cut all those off nice and clean. A little bit of scraping was needed afterwards with the hobby knife again. You can do pretty smooth work on plastic on long surfaces like that. If you drag the blade backwards, you can get a nice smooth kind of a scrape and kind of plane it off where you have cut something off that was super glued together. You sometimes end up with a little bit of bump in the plastic or whatever, some leftover super glue. You scrape that off. Again, touch it up with some paint. Now you can't see it. So now I have it the way I wanted it. I kind of screwed it up before. Again, I've been making a lot of mistakes with these armies. Where I've got one platoon of my T-54s without the side skirts and one platoon of T-55s. Uh-oh. I'm getting a warning message here, guys. Give me 1 second. Alright, guys, give me 1 second. I'm going to get a power cord from my machine. I'll be right back in just a second. Every day's an adventure here on Sitrep. Okay, where were we? So I've got some T54s with the side skirts, some T54s without the side skirts. That's on purpose. That, I should say that's on purpose. That's by design. In fact, I kind of screwed it up before. I meant to put only some side skirts on. I wound up putting all the side skirts on. I looked back and I was like, what the hell was I doing? But anyway, so I cut some of the extra ones off. Now I've got one platoon of each, and then one platoon that were converted into Type 59. So I've got three platoons of three now. And the historical record for the Gulf War shows a mix of both. So while the U.S. Marine Corps does not have the best tanks in the Gulf War compared to the U.S. Army, at least we're not up against the best Iraqi tanks either. So the Marine Corps was further out east, and they actually started fighting a little bit earlier than the rest of the coalition. They fought battles like Al Khafji, along with Saudi and Qatari forces, and even some, I think some Kuwaiti forces. I'll have to look that part up. But that part of the war, actually, there were some skirmishes. Well, I won't say skirmishes. There were like multi-divisional battles that took place intermittently. One of them was Al Khafji in mid-January, 1991. So that's a full 6 weeks before the ground war starts. That's more famous. One more part of this project that I have been working on. If I can get it out of my paint box. Yeah, I'm just starting on these guys. I'm starting on the infantry. So these are some of the 15 millimeter 1 to 100 U.S. Marine Corps infantry that come in this box here. The U.S. Marine Corps Rifle Platoon for Team Yankee. I think it's just American Rifle Platoon. It's not specified to the Marines. And it comes with 55 figures. It's not too bad. Some of these units may not be specifically applicable to the Marine Corps in 1991, but they'll be fine. Obviously, I'm just getting started on these. Cut, I should say cleaned, and some primer. I usually use black primer, then I can put like a zenithal base coat on the top, and especially for infantry, small infantry, the units are now halfway painted for me. So yeah, plenty of M249 saws, M203s, obviously M16A2 service rifles. Looks like a couple M72 laws. I'm not 100% sure about those in this time and age. Although I hear they're making a comeback in Afghanistan. Let me fix that guy. There we go. And a Dragon launcher. Dragons are era appropriate. I just have to figure out whether or not the Marine Corps was using those in 1991. I honestly don't remember. When I was trained on the AT-4. I was not trained on the Dragon, so that might be one figure that either gets proxied or I might not be able to use in a strict Marine Corps 1991 historical sense. I don't remember those. Obviously, anti-tank grenadier was not my MOS, so I just might not know. But yeah, right, ninjas. So it's still the same gun as the M1, though, isn't it? In 1991, you're talking about the M60. In 1991, no. So the M1 originally comes out with the same gun, the M68 or the L7, the 105 millimeter rifle, whatever you want to call it, and that's in the original M1. That's like it hits battalion strength in some of our divisions in West Germany in like 1983, like late 83 or 84, somewhere in there, and they enter it like that. These are almost immediately withdrawn. and upgraded, and new vehicles were then built with this new gun based on a German gun, and that's the 105 millimeter. I'm sorry, the 120 millimeter RH-120. That's a German smoothbore, far more powerful gun. The British had, ironically, even though this is a British gun originally, the British had long since abandoned their own L7, and they had gone up to first the L11 and later the L30. These are the 120 millimeter smoothbores that we see on the Chieftain, and then later the Challengers that come out in the 60s, 70s, and the Challengers again in the mid 80s. Nowadays they have the Challenger 2. Same L30 gun, 120 millimeter smoothbore, but I don't remember exactly what the mark is and what the electronics are, things like that. But at the time of the Gulf War, no, there was no U.S. Army M1s that still had the 105 millimeter rifle. No, they had long since ditched that, and they had gone over to the 105. Now you'll see a lot of M1s with 105s in the game Team Yankee, and that's because the novel Team Yankee, that's the gun they have. That's the one they include. The original 105 millimeter on the M1. So that's what the novel is, and the game is based on the novel. So I remember the kits, and Rasmus can probably back me up on this. The 105 comes in on when they sell you the kit, the 105, and they give you both the 105 and the 120, and they give you the cards for both, and the cards have you. They give you the cards for both, and the pieces obviously for both. You can build your tank either way. The 120 obviously has much better game values, but it will have a much better. It'll be a lot more expensive. Yeah, the kit has the 120 millimeter as well. I thought the 105 was in the M1 around for longer. It was definitely gone by the end of the 80s. So things like that don't happen literally at the flip of a switch. They have to take the old tanks offline, rebuild the turrets, put the new guns in. They have to buy the guns originally from the Bundeswehr, the West German Army. Then they have to actually start to build them under license. That was General Dynamics Land Division by that point. They took over from Chrysler for building most of America's tanks already at that point. And so the Americans called it either the M256 or later the M356. This is basically the RH-120 built under license. And that's what you see on the M1s going forward. By the end of the 80s, they're definitely all gone. And what you've got is 105s replaced with 120s on the M1s. That's the M1A1 Abrams. And then nowadays they have the M1A2 and the M1A3, the M1A2 Tusk. What does Tusk actually stand for? Tank Urban Survival Kit. They have the new depleted uranium armor, the armored version. There's a million different versions of the M1 out there now. All that said, you will see 105s on some M1s around the world. There are M1s in service in other countries that might still have M1s. The South Korean Republic, or the Republic of South Korea, has something I think they call the Type 88 that looks suspiciously like an M1. It's pretty much an M1 tank without the Chobham armor, because that's proprietary to NATO and Great Britain and so on. That's something else that the M1 has. The M1 has British armor basically, and what that's going to be is that still has a 105. There are 105s being used on vehicles like the Striker. There are 105s being used on some of the light tanks put out by Brazil. There's 105s being used all over the place. They're just not on the M1 Abrams, at least for the United States, for quite some time now. Pretty much since the 1980s. Or I'm sorry, since the beginning of the 1990s at least. By Desert Storm, there were no U.S. Army 105 millimeter guns, unless they were in the Army Reserve or who knows where, back in the depot waiting to get switched over. The Army didn't waste a whole lot of time making that switch. Ryan Metal for the win. Yeah, that is an amazing tank gun. The only possible rival for it is the British 120 millimeter rifle, the L30, that they have on their Challenger, their latest Challenger 2s. The RH-120 is more powerful. It's a smoothbore. It's not a rifle. Rifles
are supposedly more accurate. Again, there's a debate on that for tank guns. In small arms, obviously a rifled gun is more accurate. Ask any Civil War reenactor, he'll tell you that. Or even Napoleonic. I mean, Sharp's rifles. They called them rifles and sharpshooters for a reason. But what that also does is it slows the bullet down. And when it comes to punching through enemy armor plate, energy is everything. Those anti-tank shells that these tanks shoot at each other don't even have any explosive in them. It is a bolt of metal, usually tungsten or nowadays depleted uranium, and it's just literally a dart of pure metal. And after that, it's EK equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. It's how fast it's going is the only factor that determines whether or not it's getting through that armor or not. So the RH-120, being the same caliber and firing the same general type of ammunition, is faster because the shell is not slowed down by that rifling. It's a smoothbore gun. It comes right out of the gun tube. Then it's a sabot round, and I won't get into all the physics of how that stuff works. Fin stabilized, depleted uranium, a discarding sabot ammunition, the silver bullet ammunition that they call it. But yeah, the whole idea is to put as much force as possible into a small surface area as possible, and it will literally just punch through the tank with sheer speed, through sheer power of speed, kinetic impact. What matters a lot more than the weight of the shell is how fast it's moving. Hence the formula. Alright, so these are all painted. They've all dried to the point where I feel safe putting a little bit of a wash around them. Let me put on my super hobby glasses. These are my super thick cheaters I use for hobby. I literally can't get up out of the chair when I put these on. I will fall down because they are absurdly powerful. They're way too powerful. In fact, I start to get a headache if I wear them too long. But they're almost like little magnifying glasses. A little bit of sepia shade from Vallejo. And that's just to put a very kind of a slight wash around these very, very small parts that I've just added to the back hulls of these LAVs. This is what's going to help them blend into the rest of the vehicle a little bit better. I should probably talk more about military technology because with the quality of my webcam, you guys probably aren't getting very much hobby value out of this. Yeah, I do remember doing the unboxing at Beasts of War back when I was, I'm still a member of the community, but I guess I'm no longer really part of the team. For the Team Yankee boot camp, they actually kind of surprised me at the last minute. They were like, I was trying to build my tanks, my T-72s, and they're like, you want to do an unboxing? I was like, what do you mean? They're like, you want to get on camera and talk about these vehicles? Anders was there from Battlefront. I'm sitting there going, yeah, I can talk about these tanks a little bit, I guess. Got to sit at that weekender table, and that was actually pretty cool. And it was me, Justin, and Anders from Battlefront. The reason for that story wasn't to brag. It was just to say, yes, I do know what's in those M1 kits, even though I don't own them myself. And I remember looking at the sprue, and at least the ones that they came out with back in 2015, when this game first released. Yes, you do get both the 105 and the 120 millimeter tank gun version for the M1 Abram. One of many correct decisions that Battlefront made when they rolled out Team Yankee.
Because if they had been too purist about it and said this game is based on the novel Team Yankee, they wouldn't have given you those 120s. Those 120s do not appear in the novel. But they saw, they saw far enough ahead. I'll wait for that wash to dry and then I'll actually start painting the. So hopefully you guys see what I'm talking about here. Now there's the second one of those tiny little not pylons, those little awning. What's the word for it? Little cylinders that these tail lights are actually standing on. That's the original one. This side did not have any, so I had to add my own. I'll wait for that wash to dry, and then I'll just put two little bits of red on there. One bit of red, one bit of pink to make it shine a little bit. And then that'll take care of the back hatches of these LAVs. The sprue has everything on it, including other kits. The people will realize and start asking, when are we going to get the rules for this thing? Yeah, when I was building these, when I was building these LAVs, they came with this little boom for the improved tow vehicle mounting. Now these are originally on M113 APCs for the U.S. Army earlier in the 1980s. And so it comes with on the sprue this piece, but then also the entire top engine, I mean not really the engine deck, the entire top fighting compartment deck for an M113 APC. There are no M113s in this kit. When I first went through the sprue, I was like, what the hell, you get M113s with this thing too? But they just, okay, look, we have a sprue that has these pieces on it. Rather than retool a whole new mold or whatever for a new sprue, they just said, look, take the sprues that have this piece on it, throw it in the box, and worst comes to worst, now when you buy this kit, you have some extra pieces for your bit box. So, ironically, I actually have those out here. Yeah, here you go. So here's part of the sprue. Now I actually have the top part of an M113 for some reason. I don't have the rest of the M113, but I've got a random spare part. Also some M113 sides, some VODs. I might use these for something cool. VOD stood for Vulcan Air Defense System. It's the 20mm Gatling gun. This is the same M61 20mm 6-barreled Gatling gun, autocannon, that is in almost all of our fighters. It's basically some version, also the CIWS system on all of our naval ships. It's all pretty much the same gun. It's the M61 Vulcan. Hence VODs, Vulcan Air Defense System. That's when they slap that same gun, when they slap that same gun on the top of an old M113 APC. Because the Americans don't have anything like the Shilka. And people were starting to realize that was a problem. So they said, what can we use as a stopgap to get something kind of like the Shilka? That's what the VOD is. They tried with the Sergeant York. The Sergeant York is an abject failure. One of the biggest, I talked a lot of good things about, correct things that Battlefront did. Here's one of the things that Battlefront did not do right. They included I think it's the M998 Sergeant York twin 40mm gun system for their air defense, which is preposterous. It's just a dumb move. They should have just given you more VODs. They said, well, and it's clearly like a game company trying to build an army. Like, okay, I'm going to go to a tournament. The Soviets have a chain gun tank system like this for air defense. The Germans have the Gepard. What do the Americans have? They don't really have anything. But what was the closest thing they might have had? They had something called the Sergeant York that never really got adapted. Just throw those in the box as well. Again, it's like this is what a gaming company is trying to come out with to satisfy players who kind of build their list by formula. Like, you have to have so many of this vehicle, so many of that class of vehicle. There is no vehicle like that. I'm sorry, there just wasn't. And the Sergeant York does not count because of many reasons. Go to any Team Yankee forum and you'll hear people complaining about that. I will not add fuel to that fire. But anyway, on to something more positive. Battlefront has made far more. I mean, as a game company, for oops, Battlefront as a game company, I feel, others may disagree, in the last 3 or 4 years have made far more correct decisions than incorrect decisions. Way more. Especially in their more modern stuff. Team Yankee, they knew right away that they were going to divert away from the strict interpretation of the Team Yankee novel, so they put right off the bat 120mm guns on those M1 sprues. With the first big expansion for the Soviets they came out with was Red Thunder that included the T-64 and not the T-72. That is in Team Yankee, so they were faithful to the book, but just not so much to the real situation on the ground in that time period. The Fate of a Nation, when they re-released Fate of a Nation, they did not do what they did before. They did not make it a World War II sequel. They made it a World War III prequel, and they thereby were able to include the only Arab-Israeli war that's really worth gaming on a gaming table. Not 1967, 1973 Yom Kippur. 1967 was, as everyone mostly knows, it's a rout, so it doesn't really make. The whole 1967 war really only has about 3 or 4 big ground battles in it. And the Israelis, surprise, surprise, won them all. 1973 has a lot more room to actually explore on an actual tabletop. They couldn't do that in the old Flames of War system, but when they re-released Fate of a Nation, they didn't do it as part of Flames of War. They did it as part of Team Yankee, and that's an important distinction. Because now you can include things like helicopters, guided missiles. Did guided missiles have a big part to play in the Yom Kippur War? I don't know. You guys watch part 3 of our Arab-Israeli War Op Center series, then you guys can tell me what, tell me what you see. Yes, it's huge. It's a major, major thing. So they've been making a lot of correct decisions. Many, many more correct decisions than incorrect decisions. I'm waiting for this wash to dry, so I'm going to keep running my mouth. That said, hopefully that's not too loud. I'm trying to blow on this wash a little bit. Because obviously I have to put more paint on here. I don't want to put more paint on wet wash. Had an allied company of Germans get a Gepard. Yeah, well, Gepards were definitely a good German system. Word Gepards have been in support of American units in the eventuality of this war actually taking place. That's a lot more. It's unlikely, but it's a lot more realistic than Sergeant York's. Sergeant York's never made it off Aberdeen testing ground. I think they built a grand total of 3 of them, or 4 of them, or like very, very few of them. They were absolute disasters. They never made it off the proving grounds. Then in some of the forums, people started to argue with, well, if this war had actually taken place, it would have put them in service. Okay, all 4 of them? Okay, congratulations. And then on top of that, in real life, these things ended up as targets. So you go on YouTube and you see like Maverick anti-tank missiles blowing up old American tanks. That's what happened to these Sergeant Yorks. They didn't even make it to the garage sale. They were just absolute garbage. It was a defense contractor boondoggle. Someone was trying to put their kid through college and try to get this contract through the Pentagon. It was a mess. It was and it didn't work at all. It was really, really bad. And they already had an effective solution in place. The VODs. I think it's the M163 VODs. How many M113 chassis does the American Army have lying around? The answer, tens of thousands. Especially when they converted over to the M2 Bradley. They had tens of thousands of these old M113s laying around. You have tens of thousands of these M61 Vulcan Gatling guns laying around. Slap this piece of junk on top of this piece of junk, and you have a free air defense system. Proven chassis. It doesn't have to go as fast as the M1 because it's a support vehicle. Oh, by the way, that old, whatchamacallit? I don't even remember what it was mounted on. It was like an old M48. Not as fast as an M1 anyway. So again, it's a win-win. It was just a really stupid idea for a vehicle. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and gamble that this paint is dry enough. Try to hold this up to the camera a little bit. Not paint on my laptop. Yeah, I will. Patriotic American and veteran and all that, but there are some things that this country has done militarily that really mystify people who read about this stuff, people who know. It's and a lot of, I hate to say it, but a lot of times it's literally just this guy has a seat on the Senate Armed Forces Committee. This guy has a seat on the House Appropriations Committee. They represent this state. He represents that district in this state. There's a factory in that state. Those people want jobs. If that factory closes, those guys aren't going to get reelected. They have to keep that factory open. And, at the one hand, you want to cry out, military corruption, the defense industrial complex. On the other hand, you're talking about tens of thousands of American manufacturing jobs. So, it's not quite as simple as, left versus right, blue versus red. But at the end of the day, the soldiers, Marines, sailors, and airmen out in the field are not getting the equipment they need. That's where it becomes inexcusable. Alright, so I'm using some very basic holiday red. Again, I do most of my hobby shopping at Michael's Craft Store, so I'm sure it's not the kind of stuff you're used to. Take a little bit of red and a little bit of white, mix them together, get some light pink. Probably got too much red in there, or too much white. That's like 900 times more than I'll need, but when your bottles of paint cost like $1.59, it's no big deal. Get a much smaller brush. One thing I do spend a little bit of money on is my brushes. So yeah, this is a 5/0 brush. About like $10. Take really good care of it, lasts a while. And what I try to do here is put a dot of that either on the middle or slightly on the top of that 1 millimeter wide dot of red. So we're trying to put like half a millimeter of paint. Like that's way too much. I have to kind of counteract that now. Hold on. There we go. We want to put a little bit of pink on top of a little bit red so that it looks like it's got a little bit of a shine to it. Look at a tail light at night, you'll see that it's not usually all one color. The trick is to not put too much of your highlight color. You don't want it to completely take over your base color. Oh, and yes, I do like assembly line paint all my vehicles. There is nothing worse than sitting down and building like one LAV, painting it, and then trying to do all that over again. Do one step, finish, do the next step, finish, do the next step, finish. It has the other, perhaps unintended benefit of your army is always in one place as far as its level of completion and detail. So if you ever have to quit, or you get tired of it, or you get sick of it, or you have to shift to things other than hobby or whatever. At least your army is now usable. It's all the same level, and as long as you got three colors, you're ready to play. Oh man, we got some good discussion here in the chat here. Okay, whoa, 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 whoa. Before the Sergeant York tournament lists, okay, cool. Eras all over to overlap so you can get the odd battles like the Shermans fighting T-55s and such. Yeah, Shermans fought T-55s at least twice. They definitely fought them in 1967, and even in 73, there were some reserve brigades of IDF, especially in the South, um, armed with the Sherman. Oh God, which version of it? The M, the HMV. I can't remember. The M51 Super Sherman. That's the one with the double wide tracks. It's got a much bigger turret. It's got a French high velocity 105 millimeter gun in it. It's not the same gun as this. It's not as powerful as this, but it's the same caliber and almost as powerful. Um, yeah, it's how far you can push a Sherman. There were even some Shermans. They never fired at anybody, but there were some Shermans involved, or at least mobilized for involvement. They didn't actually get into combat in the '82 Peace for Galilee invasion. So the Israelis were using super Shermans. Again, these are Shermans modified to the point where they're almost unrecognizable. But there are super Shermans involved in the IDF frontline service until at least 1973, possibly 1982, depending on what you consider frontline service. With the Israelis, that phrase has a strange kind of a meaning here. The U.S. was always very opposed to putting unproven stuff into battle. Yeah, so yeah, I don't think they ever would have put in the Sergeant York because it didn't make it off the proving field, as opposed to the M61 and the M113 APC, the two main components that go into the VODs. Those are two of the most proven weapon systems that we've had since Korea. I mean, yeah, very, very well proven. And we did use the VODs. They eventually gave up on them because we don't really need gun-mounted air defense. There are Humvees in the U.S. Army that carry four Stinger missiles on a little swiveling turret. So for close air defense, also every infantry platoon has a Stinger. And ask the Soviets in Afghanistan how well the Stinger went. It actually really helped win that war. It almost affected a geopolitical change. It probably helped bring down the Soviet Union. The Stinger is an insanely effective air defense system. So, as far as why the Americans don't have something like the ZSU 23-4 Shilka or the more modern ZSU 30-6 Tunguska or anything like that, quite frankly, we don't really need it. You know, get something that worked, but what would you want to be the halfway around the world when? Yeah, with a test system. No, yeah, the idea of the Sergeant York on a Team Yankee table. I know it's all alternate history, but it's got to make some kind of sense, and that's the one of the few things that I don't really agree with. Um, did you guys have that issue of all those spare M1 tanks stacking up that kept being built? Not 100% sure what we mean there. You guys do have that issue of all those spare M1 tanks stacking up that keep being built. Um, so you're talking about General Dynamics for still building M1s, even though no one's buying them? The U.S. Army is still buying them. They're not expanding the force anymore, but they still have to replace the ones that are older. Also, we have several client states that use M1s. Saudi Arabia being one, and Egypt being another. There's a few others I can't remember off the top of my head, but those are the two big ones. Qatar might. No, I think Qatar uses AMXs. There's a few client states, but Saudi Arabia and Egypt are the big ones. They have a lot of M1s, and they're going to keep needing a lot of M1s. Um, at least Saudi Arabia will. Egypt, the political situation there is a little unsteady, a little cloudy in the wake of the Arab Spring, so I don't know if we still sell it to them, or if we do, on what level. I know we still do joint exercises with them. We still do like the sword point exercises with them. Um, It's either Sword Point or Bright Star. I can't remember. Um, so there's still something going on with that, but I'm not sure exactly what the status is on those contracts. Dollar store for random hobby bits. Yeah, the craft store has a lot. The hobby store has a lot. Anything that's got lots of soft, cheap plastic for spare parts, especially with terrain. For 15 millimeter vehicles, it's tough to find useful stuff that you don't make yourself. The stock M4A376 to fight one though. Did Sherman M51s fight T55s? Okay, yeah, no, but simple. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, these are the Super Shermans I was talking about. So I don't have any model kits of them out or handy or anything like that. I do have the Arab Israeli War pieces for them here, but I don't have those files ready. There are at least 3 or 4 different versions of the. Really, there's a million versions, but 3 or 4 main versions of the Sherman in the history of the IDF. Another good person to talk to about this is Sitrep supporter Damon. Damon knows a lot about this stuff. So there's what the Israelis call the M1 Sherman. Obviously, it's not the M1. The Sherman's an M4, but they call it the M1, and it's pretty much their basic version of a Sherman. This is the basic 75 millimeter dual purpose gun vanilla Sherman. This is the kind of thing that you see in all the World War II movies. Your basic Sherman. Hello, no big surprise there. They did use those. They had a handful of them in '48. They used a lot more of them in '56. They were trying to get rid of them very, very quickly though. Then they had, I can't remember what they called it. It was something, something, something. It was some kind of M1 of a Sherman. I know what kind of Sherman we would call it. We would call it like an Easy 8, or the I think Skobak's talking about here. Let me check the Twitch chat here. Yeah, the M4A376. These are the next bigger ones. These ones did fight a great deal in 1956. Peter Gifgafa, they were there for that big 7th Israeli Tank Brigade, along with some other ones. There were some support Shermans there with the 14. I'm sorry. I'm counting. I'm yelling out the Arab Israeli War figures. Like that's going to help. Sorry. The 105 millimeter howitzer, assault howitzer, rather than a 75 or 76 millimeter anti-tank gun. And then later on, we would see a bigger Shermans with again the full like Easy 8 double chambered muzzle brake type kind of guns. Those are the big 76s with the M1A1 guns on them that we would see. And then the last big ones are again the Super Shermans. These are the M51 was the Israeli designation for them, Super Sherman. A lot of people like to think they were called Ishermans. They were called Ishermans by everybody but the Israelis. That was never an Israeli term for them, to my knowledge. That's just one of those things that gets started, and I don't know where the story gets started, but whatever. Why would the Israelis call their Sherman Israeli Sherman? They know they're Israeli because they have them and they're driving them around the desert. They basically, to my knowledge, they call them the M51 Super Sherman, or like some people from other countries would call them Super Shermans. I think it's just the M51 Sherman is what the Israelis call them. And those are the ones with the French-built 105 millimeter high-velocity gun on them. Very, very powerful for a Sherman, and those are the ones that lasted a long, long time. Into 1973 at least. They did see combat in 73, and I think some brigades were mobilized that still had them in Lebanon, but they didn't actually get into combat. They were mobilized. I don't even know if they were deployed into Lebanon, but for Peace for Galilee, they were mobilized. They were there. I just don't know to what extent they were actually used. I know they did not get into combat. So you did have Super Shermans, M51s, firing at T55s in 67. Also, IS-3s in 67. Also, what else? Obviously, T-34-85s, all the usual junk that some of these PLA armies still had running around there on the Gaza Strip.
And then you finally get into the 1973 war, where again several of the reserve brigades that did get mobilized in the South. This is in the Sinai, not in the Golan Heights. Lots of Shermans do get involved in there in the southern part of the battlefield. And they're going to fight some of the Egyptians. Whether or not they fought T-55s or not, I'd have to check. There might be one or two in the southern part of the Canal Line, places like the Battle of Wadi Marbuk, 14 October 1973. By that point, though, we're looking mostly at Israeli centurions. The Israeli centurions were the ones that got deployed in the south. The Israeli, what they some people used to call them Paturians, are the ones that got deployed in the north in the Golan Heights. This is the same basic idea. It's a Sherman. That's a Sherman. Hello. It's a Centurion with the new, larger L705 millimeter rifle, but it has an American engine in it. Because you needed extra power over that uneven ground, that very rocky, very high highland kind of ground up there. So the brigades up north were, depending on who you're asking, some people call them Paturians, some people call them shot cows. Cal was actually short for the Continental engine that was in there. It was an American engine. So the Israelis were really trying to make the best of all the worlds. They had a great British tank, great British gun. The only thing they didn't like about the Centurion, nobody likes this about British tanks, are their engines. Their engines are usually pretty bad. They switched that with an American engine, and that was pretty much one of the better tanks that they had at that time period. The American tanks that the Israelis were using at that time period, the M48 A2s, which I do have some of those. Hold on just one second, guys. So these are tanks from 1967. Can't remember the name of the company. I think these are Old Glory. Great little kits. They're all metal. So these things hit the table with a thud. These are M60s. These are M48s. So you do see a little bit of a size difference there. Obviously, these still have the old American 90 millimeter gun with this little T-bar kind of a muzzle break up on here. So again, not the best kind of tank, but they were fast and they were reliable. But the Americans had much poorer armor than the British Centurions, and the gun wasn't nearly as powerful. The 90 millimeter American tank gun is nowhere near as powerful as a British 105. Trust me, it's not even close. Nevertheless, the Israelis had a lot of these in 1967. Another problem these had was a tendency of the hydraulic fluid to burst into flame. So the Israelis didn't really like these tanks. They appreciated its speed and they appreciated its mechanical reliability, but between 1967 and 73, these all got taken off the line and they got upgraded basically to this gun. So it's an M48A2 with the 90 millimeter American gun replaced with the British L7 rifle, and then these became the M48A5. And M48A5s are still in use in like second-rate, third-rate armies all over the world. I mean, countries love these things. They're super cheap, and again, once you marry that good American automotive characteristics with some decent armor and a much more powerful British gun, it becomes, a nice, cost-effective tank. Lots of people use them then. The Israelis definitely used the hell out of these things all through 1973. By 1982, the M48 had been, they call it like the Magak or something. By 1982, these have been phased out. There were some of these still in use in 82 with reactive armor panels around it. I think they call it the Magak 6. M60, British L705mm, and ERA reactive armor panels around it. It wasn't that great. In fact, it's one of the few defeats the Israelis took in that war. Can't remember the name of the battle off the top of my head, but one element, I think it was 90th Division, actually ran into a battle group of Syrian T-72s and kind of got treated pretty badly. The Israelis actually did take a tactical defeat there. It's in part 4 of our Arab Israeli series on Op Center.
But yeah, these M60s were already kind of at the end of their leash by 1982. The Marine Corps was still using them in 1991 because Marine Corps. Um, Fortunately for the Marines there at Al Khafji and also up into the southern parts of Kuwait, up toward Kuwaiti International Airport, Kuwait City, um, when actual Desert Storm actually got underway in earnest, these guys did not go up against the best of the Iraqi forces. The Marines, as much as I would like to say otherwise, never had to fight the Republican Guard in Desert Storm. They were up against strictly Iraqi army that had been some of the most heavily bombed units of the Iraqi army during the previous 6 weeks of air campaign. So you're talking about what's left of these guys. T-54s, T-55s, and Type 59s. And yeah, the Marines just had these guys for lunch. Just absolutely tore them a new one. Um, I would take an M60 over a T-54 any day of the week, especially after this thing doesn't have any fuel left, no air cover, no water. The crews are bombed into all kinds of shell shock. It's just not very good. All right, guys. So let's see here. We have been streaming now for a good grief, over an hour and a half. I didn't get very much hobby done. I pretty much just built my new taillights. Again, if I knew I was hobbying today, guys, let me go ahead and get my face here on camera a little bit. Oof. Let me shut that off. Now it's too light. All right, sorry, guys. If I knew I was going to be hobbying today, guys, I would have had a more interesting part of the tank saved for you, for the webcast or whatever, for the podcast. But again, kind of a last minute decision to stream tonight to kind of cover for the team. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this light back on because now I'm way too dark. Sorry, guys. Yeah, here's my hobby case behind me. So for now, I'm gonna go ahead and sign off the stream. Thanks very much. We're gonna see if we're gonna do more HK ops this Sunday. I've got 2 people who have said yes so far, to my knowledge. I'll have to check my emails, make sure I'm not missing anybody. But we've got 2 people lined up for HK Ops. I don't know if we're doing any Dark Star on Saturday or not. I wouldn't mind taking a weekend off, so again, there's never any pressure. But that's what we have going on so far. What else was I going to say? We definitely will not be gaming. I can't speak for the rest of the Sitrep team, but my Sunday stream will not be on next week for Thanksgiving holiday weekend. Or I won't be doing any more hobbies, stuff like this over Thanksgiving holiday weekend. So if we're gonna game, this week, and I should say this weekend. And then if we don't do anything, that's fine. If we don't, we definitely won't be doing anything next weekend, and we'll be back the weekend after that. So the first weekend of December. It's the holidays, guys. These things happen. So again, for now, I'm going to go ahead and log off the stream. Thanks very much, everybody. Let me check one more time for any last minute comments. It's only a month late for Thanksgiving. Yeah, out on Saturday. Cool. All right, awesome. Yeah. So again, if you're on the email thread, or if you want to be added to the email thread, let me know here in the stream, and I'll add you to the email thread. And if you're on the email thread, there'll be more updates. We're looking at possibly a much smaller one-game shot deal of HK Ops for Sunday, just because we won't be streaming next Sunday, the next Sunday after that, and maybe some Dark Star, maybe something else on Saturday. Depends on who's available. If no one's available, that's perfectly fine. That's totally cool. I'll use the time to catch up on the rest of my guys here. I also have to start dark washing all my Iraqis and not make the same mistake I made with my Americans. That's for damn sure. These Americans had to be done twice, which not only cost me 2 days, but in repainting them, you obviously put an extra coat of airbrush on there. You're going to lose a little bit of the detail, and the detail on those LAVs was already a little soft. So not terribly thrilled about that. I will avoid making that kind of mistake over here on my Iraqis. Just so long as my Iraqis don't wind up looking better than my Marines, that will be unacceptable. So I may intentionally damage. No, I'm just kidding. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and shut down the stream. For those of you that I'll be in touch with over the weekend, I'll see you on this weekend. For the rest of you guys, thanks very much. We definitely thank you for all your support here on Sitrep Podcast channel. And I think our next podcast goes out Patreon supporters should be getting it momentarily, or perhaps Friday morning. I'm not sure exactly when Jan's going to put that out for our Patreon supporters. I get that a little bit early. And then on a more general sense, this podcast, this latest podcast, should be going out sometime either Saturday or Sunday over the weekend. So again, that's going to be it for now. Thanks very much for your support, everybody, and I'll be in touch with everybody throughout the week. Thanks again. Oops.
Are you looking to become a Tier 1 operator in the gaming world? Elevate your games with Black Site Studio Terrain.